Albert Fish, a notorious figure from the 1920s New York, was a disturbed predator who inflicted pain viciously and ended the lives of at least 3 children. Fish, born as Hamilton Howard Fish in Washington, D.C. on May 19, 1870, was known by many names: the Brooklyn Vampire, the Werewolf of Wisteria, and the Grey Man. Fish's childhood was marked by mental illness, a condition that also affected several of his family members. His brother was institutionalized, his uncle was diagnosed with mania, and his mother was prone to visual hallucinations. Fish's father, who was 75 years old when Fish was born, passed away when Fish was only 5. His mother, now a widow, was unable to provide for Fish and his 3 siblings on her own, leading to their placement in a state orphanage. It was in this harsh environment that Fish developed a disturbing fascination with pain. The orphanage's caretakers routinely subjected the children to physical punishment, sometimes even encouraging the children to harm one another. While most children dreaded these brutal punishments, Fish found a perverse pleasure in them. "I was there till I was nearly 9, and that's where I got started wrong," Fish later recalled. "We were unmercifully whipped. I saw boys doing many things they should not have done." His experiences led him to derive pleasure from pain, a sensation that eventually intertwined with his sexual desires. In 1880, his mother, having achieved mental stability and financial independence, was able to take him back home from the orphanage. However, the psychological scars had already been etched deep within him. Fish persisted in inflicting pain upon himself and in 1882 started a detrimental relationship with a boy. This boy acquainted him with the sexual behaviours of urolania and coprophagia, which involved the ingestion of human waste. Over time, his sadomasochistic desires consumed him, resulting in an unhealthy fixation on self-inflicted sexual harm. He would often pierce his groin and stomach with sharp needles and whip himself with a paddle studded with nails. Surprisingly, in 1898, Fish married a woman his mother had arranged for him and had 6 children with her. Despite this, he continued to violently abuse other children throughout their childhood. In 1910, while working as a house painter in Delaware, Fish met Thomas Kedden. They entered into a sadomasochistic relationship, but it is unclear how much consent Kedden gave. In later accounts, Fish would suggest that Kedden may have had an intellectual disability, although it was difficult to verify the truth in Fish's stories. Only 10 days after meeting Kedden, Fish convinced him to come to an abandoned farmhouse under false pretenses. Once there, Kedden was trapped and subjected to 2 weeks of torture by Fish. The depraved killer mutilated Kedden's body and even cut off half of his penis. Then, without warning, Fish vanished, leaving behind a mere $10 bill for Kedden's suffering. "I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me," Fish later recalled. "And if you think this can't get worse, just wait for it." By 1917, Albert Fish could no longer hide the signs of his deteriorating mental state. His wife left him for another man due to his increasingly disturbing behaviour. As time went on, he engaged in dangerous acts of self-harm, from inserting needles into his groin to lighting wool covered in lighter fluid inside his anus. He also began to experience auditory hallucinations and claimed that John the Apostle commanded him to wrap himself in a carpet. As his mental state worsened, Fish started to teach his children games that involved sadomasochistic elements. He later became obsessed with cannibalism and would eat raw meat as a precursor to consuming human flesh. In 1919, Fish's obsession with torture and cannibalism drove him to contemplate murder. He sought out vulnerable children, such as those who were intellectually disabled or orphaned, assuming they wouldn't be missed. According to Fish's trial and subsequent writings, he believed that God spoke to him and commanded him to torture and consume young children. He often searched for potential victims by responding to ads placed by families looking for housework or young men seeking employment. It was through one of these advertisements that he encountered the Budd family and initially planned on targeting their son Edward for torture at his country house. However, upon meeting the family, he shifted his focus to their 10-year-old daughter, Grace. Under the guise of looking for farm work and help around the house, Fish convinced her parents to allow her to accompany him to visit his niece for her birthday party. The Budds never saw Grace again after she left with Albert Fish in her Sunday best dress. In reality, he took her back to his home upstate, where he had intended to use it as a torture chamber for her brother, but instead used it to carry out unspeakable acts against Grace before ultimately killing her. As his gruesome letter read, "First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take the meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body." The letter, evidently designed to instill panic within the Budd household, expedited the downfall of Albert Fish. Before we continue, we'd like to take a moment to remind you to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so already. We also appreciate it if you could share this video with others who might be interested in true crime stories. Now let's delve back into the dark tale of Albert Fish. The stationery used for the letter was traced back to the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. Upon investigation, police discovered that a janitor from the company had inadvertently left it at a boarding house where he had stayed. At that same boarding house, a man named Albert Fish was found to have been renting a room. When police learned that Fish closely matched the description of Frank Howard, the abductor of Grace Budd, they arranged an interview. To their astonishment, Fish immediately confessed, eagerly divulging the horrific details of his actions towards Grace Budd and potentially dozens of other children. Ultimately, only 3 victims, including Grace, could be definitively attributed to him. The murder of Grace Budd stood out as the most notorious among Fish's heinous acts. However, following his arrest, 2 additional murders were connected to him. As expected, they were equally horrifying. The Crime Museum reports that Albert Fish is suspected of murdering a 4-year-old boy named Billy Gaffney. Billy vanished while playing with a neighbour in Brooklyn on February 11, 1927. The neighbour's child later told police that the boogeyman had taken Billy. This boogeyman was described by the 3-year-old as a slim, old man with grey hair and a moustache. Initially, officers did not take the child's account seriously. However, after an exhaustive search of the neighbourhood yielded no leads, they came to accept that Billy had been kidnapped. He was never found. Following Fish's capture, a trolley motorman in Brooklyn identified him as the nervous old man he had seen on the day of Billy's disappearance. In a sickening manner, Fish confessed to the kidnapping and murder of Billy in gruesome detail. "I took tools, a good heavy cat of 9 tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these halves in 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood." Although Billy's remains were never found, Fish's 3rd confirmed victim was located relatively quickly. In 1924, a young boy named Francis McDonald disappeared while playing with his brother and friends on Staten Island. His body was soon discovered in the woods, strangled by his own suspenders. Shortly before Albert Fish was executed, he confessed to luring Francis into the woods and assaulting and strangling him. He also admitted that he planned to dismember the boy, but heard someone approaching and fled. Fish's trial began on March 11, 1935, and clearly showed that he was mentally unstable. His defense pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. While numerous psychiatrists supported this plea, the jury found Fish sane enough to be convicted. The trial lasted 10 days and ended with a verdict that led to Fish's execution by electrocution the next year. While imprisoned at Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York, Fish was allowed to write notes detailing his crimes. These notes provided reporters with a first-hand account of the gruesome case and attracted readers. It is believed that Fish killed between 3 and 9 victims, but he claimed to have had a child in every state. However, this statement was never confirmed, and his detailed recollections from prison have never been released. Before his execution on January 16, 1936, Fish's attorney, Jack Dempsey, refused to share his notes with the public. It was clear from just one glance that the content of these notes was too disturbing for public consumption. "I will never show it to anyone," he said. "It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I've ever read." If you like this video, I've got another video about a Russian man that mummified little girls that is on your screen right now. Thank you for watching, and until next time.